What's up? Thanks for checking out the Social Gelo with Angelo podcast. Today I interviewed Daniele Bolelli, who is an author, historian, professor, and also a former guest of the Joe Rogen Experience podcast. Really cool guy, lots of cool stuff. I hope you enjoy the show. All right, so I'm here with Daniele Bolelli. What's up, man?
Good, man. Thanks for having me.
No problem. This is a surreal experience for me. I've heard your podcast. It's really weird talking to someone that you've heard for hours, but you're meeting them for the first time.
Of course.
You're not the first now, finally. Like I've had a few other guests on here that
Right.
it was the same situation. It's always kind of strange. But thank you very much for taking your time to come out and share your story with us. I guess to open things up, Daniele, a lot of my listeners come from a Kajukembo background.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Hawaiian martial art, or it's a martial art to start in Hawaii.
Right.
But I guess for those people that may not know of you, how did you get into martial arts? Like, what's your journey like? What style did you study first? How did all that work out?
Sure. I started training when I was 17. I was still living in Italy. 17 back then, it was like, might as well been 300 years ago because it was pre-internet. It was, so, you get what you get off the yellow pages when they still existed. You have no idea what you're getting into half of the time. So the way I started out, I started primarily with Chinese martial arts initially. I dabbled for about 4 years or so, trying a few things here and there. Eventually, I settled on a style by the time I was 21 called, even that's funny because they call it Kung Fu Sansu, which doesn't really mean much because it's like the same as Sanshou, but it's not really Sanshou. It's actually a Southern Chinese family style, probably derivative from Choi Li Foot. That's my guess.
Okay.
But kind of modified in US and it became its own thing. So I did that for a while. I had fun with that, but eventually I found myself gravitating more toward combat sports. So I started doing Western boxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, judo, that kind of stuff. MMA as a result of that. And I like martial arts, period, without a qualifier. I like everything. So I've trained in a bunch of things, even for decent amounts of time. I did a bunch of Chinese internal style, Bagua, Xingyi, Tai Chi, that kind of thing. But the things that I've been doing the most for the past while has been primarily judo and jiu-jitsu as of late. That has been more, even because I'm tired of getting punched in the head. So judo and jiu-jitsu seem like a good thing to avoid that.
So kind of going back, do you remember? You said you dabbled, and you started in Italy, right?
Yeah.
And that was 17 years ago. Is that I can't?
No, that's when I was 17.
When you were 17.
So that was 30 years ago.
30 years ago. Okay, so that's in that timeline. Looking at Italy 30 years ago, what kind of styles were you? You said you were dabbling in different kung fu styles.
The initial one were some kind of, random crap that they called Shaolin. Who the hell knows what it was? Wasn't really that good or anything, but it was just an introduction, just to be like, whoa, martial arts. This is interesting. And so the beginning was a little bit of that, a little bit of modern wushu that I didn't really care for, but it was nothing else. So I tried. And that's why when I found Sansu in US, I was like, oh, I like this. This is kind of fun. It had a more, based on what I've seen of Kajukembo, is a little more similar to that than to the stuff I was training earlier. So I enjoyed it. I mean, I teach my daughter, I teach, my girlfriends. So I still practice it. I've done that one for a million years. The only thing I don't like about that one is that, like, all the more traditional styles that are focused on self-defense, where they don't have a combat sport application to it, inevitably, I think is the problem of all of martial arts, is there is no such thing as training for fighting by fighting, because everything is an approximation of what a real fight is. Otherwise, you kill each other every night and you can't. So you either go the self-defense style, which is, you go every single target there is, but you have to do it semi-cooperatively to avoid destroying each other, or you take out all the more effective targets by you train it in full sparring, full on like combat sports. I find that both approaches are interesting. They both give you something that you need, but by themselves, I find something lacking in each one. And the problem with this more self-defense based one was that clearly you lack the feedback of a resisting opponent. And so, you have all the right targets, all the right stuff. The problem is, have you ever done it under pressure? Have you ever done it with adrenaline? Have you ever done it with somebody who's not just a random drunk on the street? Have you ever applied it? So I liked it a lot, but I was also like, methodology, you also need something else methodology-wise. Otherwise, you're stuck in fantasy land and you get some of these guys who start thinking that they are amazing. And it's like, no, trust me, a high school wrestler who's going to shoot a double on you at 10,000 million miles an hour, you're going to be real surprised. And so, like anything, I like it with some limits. And so then that's when I look elsewhere to deal with the things that I felt were lacking in the style.
So you kind of went from, if I'm hearing this correctly, you kind of went from like a soft style with self-defense, and you started moving into a hard style. And then for the people that might be listening to this that don't know what Kembo is, thank you for checking out my podcast. Kembo likes to mix both hard and soft styles, and we don't have any rigid rules as to what our instructors teach. So you might find an instructor who does gravitate towards soft, or you might, but has some hard. At the end of the day, all the Kembo guys are pressure testing their stuff, or we hope to say that. I can't generalize there. But going from like a softer style to a harder style, like boxing, for example, and then for you, you got into boxing, and then you mentioned jiu-jitsu, right?
Yep.
And when you got into boxing and jiu-jitsu, what was that like? Were you sparring before that, or was it just like, was that your first time sparring?
I sparred, but I sparred in a more, I guess, without the proper instruction kind of thing. Just you put on the gloves and you go at it type of stuff. I even did I think even before I did boxing, I did amateur with headgear on kind of stuff, MMA match. And that was a good wake-up call, because I was like, whoa, there's a lot of stuff I thought that would work that really doesn't work. And there's some stuff that actually is much easier to apply under pressure. And so I was like, okay. And that's when I immediately did, okay, I need some wrestling, I need some boxing. And that changed my game a little bit already.
So let's go back to that MMA.
Yeah.
That MMA experience for you. So you were sparring in your style that had a little bit of hard, and it kind of was a little more soft. And you were sparring. Was that on your own, or was that through the
pretty much on my own?
That was on your own. Okay, so you were kind of like asking your friends, "Hey, let's spar after class, or let's spar at the park," that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay, so you did it on your own, and you said, "Okay, I'm ready for an MMA match."
Yeah, it was other people.
How did that happen?
Also, I think this was 2001 or something. So, most people were not training MMA. Most people, even jiu-jitsu, if somebody had a purple belt, they were God pretty much. It was many people were terrible back then. And so there was kind of let's try and find out how it is under pressure. And it was very different game to even compared to jiu-jitsu class, because it's it's the same thing that you notice when you're in competition. People don't tap to the kind of stuff that they would tap on in training. Unless you really have it sunk it in 100%, there's the stuff that they're like, oh, kind of getting me tap. Is like, nope, that's not what happens under pressure. And so it was definitely like, whoa, that changes the game. I was playing the little bit of grappling I had. I was playing a lot of guard, and I realized, no, guard sucks in MMA. I don't want to be on the bottom if I can help it. I'd rather get the takedown and be on top. So that's where the wrestling came in. So that's where I started understanding a couple of things differently. And I was like, okay, I need to change the game around. And I like judo a lot, but that was really hard to adapt to MMA because of the use of the, relying so much on the gi. Wrestling was easier. So I like judo, I still practice it. I enjoy it a lot, but it's a little less of a straight path toward being applicable toward MMA. So whereas wrestling was one of the things that I was like, are you kidding me? It's like within 3 months of wrestling, suddenly I could take people down at will in many MMA thing. And I was like, whoa, that's really easy. That makes knowing how to shoot a good double makes a humongous difference. And I was like, okay, that changes the game.
So kind of looking at that, so at that point, by the time you did go into your MMA match, you did already do some boxing and some wrestling and some jiu-jitsu. It wasn't like you went just from that soft style into the cage. Like
no. First I did with next to no preparation. And then after the first 1 or 2, I switched and I went the other route. And I decided I should add the pieces to my game because this is not working as ideally as I would like to.
And now let's jump into all this is happening, and we always have, like, martial artists. I like to say we have 2 lives. We have the martial arts life, and then we have our everyday life. So
right,
you were in Italy. I'm gonna keep rewinding the story. You were in Italy. You did your kung fu. You came to America. You jumped into the cage. How did you end up jumping into the cage? Was that something that got thrown at you, or was that something that you signed up for?
No, the evolution was so when I came to US, that's when I started training Sun Tzu. I trained in that one for a while. And then in the process of doing that, I ran into a guy who had been training Sun Tzu, but later had gone to China and lived there to Taiwan and lived there for 11 years, trained Tai Chi, Bagua, Xingyi. And I was interested, so I went to meet him. I really liked the guy, Tim Cartmel. And Cartmel also was getting heavy into jiu-jitsu. I mean, now he's like a jiu-jitsu freak. He's like, I forget what it is, like super high level black belt, but like really good level. And so by training with him, he was in the process of making the shift from teaching primarily Chinese styles to primarily becoming a jiu-jitsu teacher. And so in the process of that, he was a school that was focused on Chinese style, but was integrating more and more grappling and more jiu-jitsu. And so he, I think, organized something for his students and a few other schools nearby. And so was kind of in that people who are familiar with combat sports, but not really specialists yet, and was part of that arc. So I got to try it in that format. And then after that is where I was like, you know what, this makes sense, but I really think I should add other pieces to the puzzle. And that's where I started going into the wrestling, boxing, jiu-jitsu direction more so.
Okay. All right. And then, so you got into MMA, you started adding more to your game, you started adding more puzzles, like you said, wrestling, and you finally you kind of went towards the result that you wanted. And I am kind of avoiding what that result is because I would like my listeners to read your book, which I introduced off camera before we started talking here. So if you want to hear the results of those fights and like that stuff that was going on, I do encourage you to read the book. Which was Not Afraid, on fear, heartbreak, raising a baby girl, and cage fighting. So looking at that though, and without giving away too much of the stories from your book, but still letting people know what happened, your primary career, was it to become an MMA fighter? Was there even a path for that? Like, whoa, I can become a millionaire MMA fighter. Like, was that even a possibility?
No, I mean, not really. I was, it was funny. When I came to US, I sort of had to stay in school because, I could defer other stuff I didn't want to deal with in Italy as long as I was in school. So I kind of ended up getting a master's and starting to teach almost by chance. And then I realized, okay, I can teach. This is fun, and this is I enjoy it. And so I ended up starting to teach at college level. I started teaching in history, and so that was the thing I was doing to make money. I was, and it's not exactly crazy money, but it was enough to pay the bills. So I was, even in terms of training, sometime, I realized pretty early on, because at that time, my wife was going to school still. She wasn't going to make money for quite a while. And so for me, it was like, I understand that I'm never going to be the guy who can train 5-6 days a week, because half of the nights of the week, I have to teach classes. I have to take classes whenever I can get them. So it was one of those things where it's like, it actually gave me two things, this thing of being the guy who's always going to be, like, I was thinking long term. It's like, I want to train for the rest of my life, but realistically, I'm never going to be able to train more than 3 days a week, top. you know, which obviously is different from, somebody who gets there at 18, they are not doing much and they train twice a day, 6 days a week. Is a completely different game. It's a different experience. So that was both in terms of my expectations. It's like, look, I'm in for the long haul. I'm not trying to become amazing tomorrow. But at the same time was also this idea of I need to be sneaky, because I cannot build a game I cannot do the exact same thing everybody else does and expect to be as good when they train twice as hard. So if I am going to be sparring and training with people who train a lot more than I do, I need to know, of course, you need to know the basics, you need to know what everybody else does, but I also need to develop my own weird, quirky thing. So, for example, I was huge into leg locks like in 2004, which is way before most of the jiu-jitsu folks started getting. I mean, there were people who were doing them. Of course, that's how I learned them, but it wasn't common at all. And the reason being, I was like, look, I'm never going to catch a guy who trains more than me and is better than me in an armbar or a choke, where everybody's trying to catch them in an armbar or a choke 10 times a day. But if most of these guys are not that good at leg locks, so if I can shift the game to go to a place where they are not that good, suddenly his high level belt just went down to my level or even lower. So now I have an advantage. I did the same thing in striking. I was never like the greatest technical boxer there was, but I would do weird stuff that would, like I remember my boxing coach saying, every time you throw a good punch, I'm safe because, it's a good punch, but I've seen people throw it faster and harder a million times. So, it's a good punch, but I'm good with it. Every time you throw a really weird, ugly punch, you catch me every time because I don't see that angle. I don't recognize it. And so you come from these weird angles that I can't see, and it works. It works for you. It's like ugly boxing, but it really works. And so I did that a lot. I would spar with people. And I mean, I remember literally in boxing, landing shots because I fake a double leg on somebody. And it's not even legal. So it's like, what are you even worried about your leg? You don't need to worry. Like, it's somebody fake, who cares? But it's like, just to get that reaction of like, oh shit, they drop their hands and suddenly you... So I played a lot of like, my whole idea was like, I need to make my game weird enough that that element of weirdness gives me an edge over people who are better than me, essentially. I mean, again, if they are better, they will beat you eventually. But if we spar once, all I have to be better than them is that one time, And so having a game built around weirdness kind of served me well.
And how do you feel? So you were, if I understand the story correctly, you were teaching at a university.
Yeah.
And then on the side, you were MMA fighting for fun.
Yep.
Essentially. And how did the people at work know what you were doing?
Maybe, who knows? It was always one of the things where I never really thought that hard about, like, it was obvious that I didn't fit in an academic culture. I don't fit in anywhere anyway, because I have too many, like, I don't know if it ever happens to you when, meet somebody on Facebook or something and you know them in real life, but you know them for one thing. And then you're like, oh, let's see what's up. And you look at their profile and all there is about that one thing. And I'm like, oh, damn, I like that one thing, but I'm not that. I think like for me, it's like I'm into more than one thing. So I never neatly fit into those words that are very clearly defined from A to Z. So it's like, academic world in particular, I found it. I mean, many people in there are nice people, but I'm like, it's like I would do things that to me are perfectly normal, and they would look at me like an alien, because it's like, I remember one time I was up for a job and I got, the department chair at that place really didn't like me, and I was like, why doesn't she not like me? What's the issue there? And I'm like, and I'm wandering there, and in the meantime, I have like my boxing gloves strapped to my neck as I'm in office hours, listening to Eminem and looking at the renewal of my medical marijuana license. And I was like, let's see at the mystery of why you don't fit in. It's like, what do you expect,
And I think you're touching on a really interesting thing here about what people can handle as far as what they perceive you as. I have a background in psychology, and What helped, one of the things that helped this podcast was when I narrowed down. Because when I started this podcast, it was supposed to be about everything. It was supposed to be my life in Japan, psychology, martial arts, social psychology, including economic stuff. And I tried to go that route. And then people just kept asking me, I don't understand what your podcast is about.
Yep.
So like I finally had to say, okay, all right, I guess I'm going to narrow it down to, it got more successful when I said, okay, I'm going to narrow it down to martial arts and hit those topics in between.
Absolutely.
And then when you talk about the Facebook thing, same with my Facebook. I had my students saying, Angelo, can you post more videos of the martial arts stuff? Because on my Facebook page, it was just me and my life in Japan. I wasn't trying to market anything.
Yeah.
And one of my students that was like more social media inclined was like, if you focus on one thing, more people are going to come. And he was right. I hate it. I personally hate only posting martial arts all the time on that Facebook page, which is why like I created another Facebook page that has more of my weirdness in it so that I can be weird. And then it's weird. It's funny. Those people know me as the weird guy who writes jokes,
right?
Post memes. And now those people want nothing to do with the martial arts stuff. So
I know. It's weird. It really is how it is. It's like people like labels because they can clearly identify you with something. There's a set of expectations, and that's what they want. They don't really want you as a human being 360. They want you for the one role that you play, and that. So I mean, it is what it is. It's not ideal, but it's how the human mind works. So it's good to be aware of it and be able to deliver accordingly. If you feel like playing that game. Otherwise, just don't, and you have less people who pay attention. That's all.
Yeah, it's great for living life. Kind of difficult when you're marketing a podcast.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I do something like that. Like, for example, I host 2 podcasts. I host the Drunken Taoist and History on Fire. The Drunken Taoist is about everything and nothing. It's about, depends on the episode dramatically, can change completely. History on Fire is very clear what it is. It's about history. Every time I'll tackle a topic and I'll do a deep dive on that topic and tell it to you in kind of exciting fashion, like you're watching Game of Thrones kind of thing. But it's history. It's very, and it's not even comparable how much more attention the clearly identifiable one gets compared to the let's see what's up today kind of thing.
And how do you balance all that then? So like, you're all these people, right? You're Daniele Bolelli, the author, but Daniele Bolelli, the writer. I know you've written books not just about martial arts, but also your book about was it Choose Your Own Religion? I might have just made up my own title.
Create your own religion. Yeah, it's I mean, exactly. I'm into many things. I'm not into one thing. So it's I dig it. I like it that way. And so that's, but yeah, of course, people usually tend to tie you. I mean, it's the same thing, like think about actors, right? If an actor is really good at that one thing, they have a breakout performance as the funny guy or the drama guy or the one who's screaming. All they cast them is the same role forever after that. Maybe they can do other stuff. Maybe they are really good at other stuff. Nobody cares. It's like, we don't want to get to know you again as the other one. We want to get to know you. You are the one who gets mad and scream all the time. And every time we have a role that's about getting mad and screaming, we'll cast you. And that's kind of how people tend to operate.
Yeah, and I think I believe it was Maslow in psychology that touched a little bit on how people wear masks.
Mm-hmm.
And people have generalized this to more easier terms about the several hats that you wear. I think they talk about hats, and it's very similar as far as what people see you as. And once they see you as that one thing, then you as the individual now feel like you're wearing a mask, even though that is part of you. Now you feel like you have to put that on to stay connected for it.
To feel less crappy about it, I see it as speaking different languages. It's kind of like, you speak the martial art language. Okay, we can speak the martial art language. I'm familiar in that. But maybe there's another language that I speak that you're not familiar with. I'm not going to necessarily throw it at, I understand that if we're going to communicate, I'll have to communicate through that channel. And that's fine. If you happen to have more than one language, great. We can communicate on multiple at the same time. But if we don't, we don't. And then I'll just, there are people that, of course, I'm not going to tell them about whatever particular topic they're into. I will, or rather that I'm into, I'll I will be able to bond. I will be able to create a relationship, a line of communication if I'm able to speak through their language. And that's all right. In an ideal world, it would be nice if people were open to more than one language. But, if you know how to speak more than one, great. You can touch base with people from different walks of life.
And kind of from that note, you did, going back to that transitional, or those several transitions in your life, you finished your MMA fight. When you were kind of transitioning away, not really away from MMA, but you were going to stop fighting, right?
Mm-hmm.
I take it you're not fighting anymore. I made an assumption there.
No, yeah, you're correct.
Yeah. So what was that like? How did you come about making that decision?
Yeah, wasn't really a decision. I think is what happened when my daughter was born. It was, the time and the energy I had was shrunk even further. So I had very little time to train. And then after that, shortly, like a year and a half into it, after my daughter was born, my wife died. So that meant, pressure was on me 10 times more to take care of my daughter, to teach, to make a living, to figure out what to do. So, eventually, I always trained, but by that point I was training like twice a month or something, just to remember that it exists, kind of thing. And then by the time she was maybe, I think, 5 or 6 or something, I was able to start going back. Okay, now we are hitting twice a week. That's good. That's a decent start. And now maybe I'll squeeze in an extra day, that kind of thing. But, by that point, my daughter was born when I was, what was I, 35. So, you take 5 years mostly off around that time. Of course, by the time you're back, you do something. You're not doing the same thing. Your whole attitude, your whole approach to things is different by that point. So that's kind of, it wasn't exactly a conscious decision. It was more like life events made it so that, yeah, I had to change my approach.
And did you, since you were coming more from the very beginning saying, hey, I'm not trying to be a professional MMA fighter.
Sure.
This is just something I love to do.
Mm-hmm.
But life kind of made the decision for you where you weren't going to compete in MMA anymore.
Yeah.
How did that affect you as far as when did you realize it? When did you realize, oh, you know what? Competition's done for me. It's not going to happen.
It was one of the things where it's like, in your mind, you still fantasize of like, oh, maybe I'm going to do this, maybe I'm going to do that. And then you realize it's like, dude, it has been 7 years. It's probably not going to happen. It's like you're also, I think, all the stress of that period really jacked me up. So physically, I was a lot more vulnerable than I was before. I would get injured more. I would take me longer. Partially is aging process, but partially was stress. Take longer to heal and stuff, where it got to a point where it's like your day-to-day life has been way stressful. The last thing you need is to add experiences that are more stressful, even if they can be good and they can be fun. Like intensity is really not what you need right now. You need the opposite. You need to mellow out. You need to be able to find a place where you can calm down, where you can so rolling around for fun, that's awesome. It kind of does that. But like when you put yourself under the pressure of heavy competition and all of that, is like, I don't really need that kind of intensity. I did, what did I do? I did a couple of submission grappling matches. And that was fun. That was cool. I enjoyed that. But that was that.
And at this point, if you don't mind me asking your age, would you mind?
Yeah, sure. I'm 47 right now.
47. All right. Yeah. And then at this point, you're not looking at doing a grappling tournament or anything like that.
No,
you're
really.
okay. You're okay with where you're at.
Yeah. I just like to train,
Yeah.
I like to train. I like to, if I can help somebody, teaching them something great, but that's pretty much it. Also, what's weird is, my girlfriend has been fighting professionally, and she fights for one championship, and it's and that kind of changed my attitude about MMA. I find myself, I enjoy it way less. because it's stressful. It's really stressful. Like the last time, one wasn't showing the match live. I mean, it was in Asia. She was fighting in Singapore, and I was in US. So the only way to see it is like usually through the one app. You see it when it's happening live. And that one, they had it, and then they were showing it a week later, so they were not gonna show it at the time. And I realized it was so much better for me. I was like, I would much rather take a sleeping pill, pass out, try to sleep a few hours, and wake up to find out what happened rather than watch it live. Like way too stressful. Not good for me.
I think it's totally different. I was never. I think it's totally different watching MMA when you and someone you love is not involved. Like if you just go, if you're watching two fighters that you don't know.
Yeah.
You're not too invested. You haven't bet a bunch of money on it or anything like that. You're just watching it for fun. There's the entertaining factor, but it's a total different game when you're watching someone you love, or if you're coaching, because I'll coach and I'll put a guy in there. I'm just like cringing the whole time.
It's brutal. And the thing that's weird is that I find it affects also watching MMA where it's not somebody I know. Where now, when I watch a fight, I mean, that fight is inevitable. It's part of the game, but like where you see a big KO, where before I would be like, oh, I hope that guy is not dead, but hey, that was a great KO. Now the factor, that's really bad for that dude's brain kind of element has been rising a lot more in my consciousness compared to wow, that was a phenomenal KO. So it's makes it a little harder to watch the same way I did.
Yeah, I feel like it's work now. That's how I feel when I watch.
Yeah.
And as a coach, as someone who does like I do, it's not my main career. It's just people approach me and say they want to coach them in Japan. So I feel it's my responsibility to do so. But now when I watch MMA, I'm always like I'm trying to say, okay, everyone's gonna have beers and watch MMA, and I'm sitting there taking notes or what, like. Oh, look how many leg kicks he got, about 56. And I'm sitting there statistically looking at the fight. I'm like, oh God, I'm working on a Saturday.
No, it is. It really is. I completely get it.
So in that transitional period, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about, because I'm in that same boat. I stopped. I was going to go back. COVID hit. I'm 39 this year.
Right.
And I'm realizing the same stuff. I'm like, hey, and my guys are always asking me, you going to go back in? And I'm like, I can, I just don't, since I never did this as a career.
Sure.
I ended up doing a professional match they told me it was an amateur. You got to love Japanese communication. They told me it was an amateur match. I thought I was going to be a smoker where you just walk in, there's going to be different gyms, and we're at a theater. I'm like, what's going on? And then they're like, where's your theme music? I'm like, my theme music? And next thing you know, I'm in a pro fight. And I'm like, whoa. So like, luckily it was a pro fight under amateur rules, which at least they stuck to that. So like the amateur rules in Japan are you're not allowed to ground and pound. So you can ground and pound to the body, but not the head.
Yeah.
And
kind of pancreas type of stuff.
Kind of pancreas style. But when you're standing up, it's like kickboxing. I'm like, all right, at least we're sticking to that set of rules. Yeah. But after that, I wrote all my gym that I was doing some sub just for fun. I was coaching at an MMA gym, and they were just like, hey, we have a pro fighter now as our coach. I'm like, whoa, guys, slow down. Slow down here. I'm just an English teacher. I do train 6 days a week because I'm lucky to do it. But it was never my goal. Yeah. I guess people see you training 6 days a week, so they assume that must be what you're going to do. I just love doing it. And same transitional period, though. I also have a daughter who was, she's 5 now. So that was 5 years ago. She was born when they did that pro fight. So I kind of got sucked into it again. I left it when I was 25. I did it at 25. I did smokers when I was 25. It came to Japan.
Yeah.
Thought told my wife I put it behind me. She wasn't happy about that. So like that transitional period, that moment where you switch and say, okay, this is something I love, but this isn't necessarily something it might be something that's not going to help me at all. It might actually hold me back from the other stuff I need to do.
Yeah.
So
there's a point where it's like, why are you doing it? Is it still serving you? Is it helping you? Is it not? And, different phases of life are different in that regard.
And you were mentioning you also teach. You teach martial arts
Yeah,
your
I taught for
daughter?
a while. Yeah, like I taught from the time I was about 25, 20, something like that, for about 7 years. I think 25 to 32 roughly. I taught martial art classes, and I still enjoy just even you go roll jujitsu and you grab somebody who's less experienced and you work with them and you help them out, and even as you roll, they ask you things, and then you can. And I'm like, that's fun. I enjoy that, and I think that also helps in the regard of being used to teaching in general, not just martial arts. That usually you have a sense of what it takes for somebody to learn. Because I give you an example, like my judo kind of sucks, to be perfectly honest, my judo is far from this amazing. I'm okay, that's about it. But like I would train with somebody and maybe I'll grab a new person and we're training together, and they're like, man, I learned more judo today than in the last 6 months. And I'm like, really? Because I suck. So I don't know how. But then I think about it. I'm like, oh, because I actually break down the concepts in a way that actually are easier to digest. And yeah, I can see. Hell, I wish somebody taught me that way. I would have learned faster. It would have been a lot easier. So I think, yeah, I'm way better in that regard. I think I'm okay. I mean, inevitably, I've done martial art for 30 years. So, of course, you're going to know something. You're not going to totally suck after that long. But I think like my ability to explain it to somebody else, to break it down, to help them see where they are stuck and to help them learn things is way higher than purely my ability as an athlete.
And those are two different things, right? I, I
Yeah.
I always want to say, like, teaching and competing. You might have someone who's really good at competing, kind of
Yep.
sucks at teaching, and
Yeah.
you might have someone who's really good at teaching, sucks at
Yeah.
competing. It's just not their thing. Those are different skill sets.
They
Some
are.
would argue,
They are.
some could argue
And
there's
some people can combine both. Some people can combine both, but to very different degrees, or they can be balanced, or they can be 100-0. It's like definitely those are two different skill sets, and there's no rule that say that you only need to have one skill set. But clearly, just because you know how to do one thing well doesn't mean you know how to do the other.
so you've moved into, you still train, you want to keep doing it for the rest of your life, so obviously you're
Yeah.
still primarily focusing more on grappling now, judo
Yeah.
and jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. Judo, jiu-jitsu, and I teach the self-defense stuff, the Sun Tzu style, to my daughter and stuff. So it's like that's kind of what I do. Those three things primarily.
Cool.
Well, okay. Primarily, kind of like I just realized. Oh, yesterday I was like working with a guy on like Kali Eskrima stuff, and I'm like, I want to learn that. That's cool. So it's like mostly that, but then you never know.
There's just too much stuff.
Yeah,
There's
seriously.
too much
It's
cool stuff
like,
out there.
that's one thing that was weird yesterday as I was playing with the Kali Eskrima stuff. I was like, oh my God, I am so much more natural at this than I am at things like judo that it's not even funny. Like this stuff I can pick up really quickly. Most judo, no, I don't pick up quickly at all. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's clearly a different part of the brain, and the style fits my game a little better. And so it was interesting.
Yeah, something I've been thinking about more, and I was talking to my other Kajikembo instructors in the community I'm in. I was telling them, is it really about style? Is it really about techniques? Because Kajikembo actually is not a style; it's more
Sure.
of a method.
Right.
And because of that, I'm always telling the guys, I'm like, is it really about style? Like, we keep learning techniques and techniques
Mm-hmm.
and more techniques, and some of the guys get into Eskrima and they get into
Yeah.
FMA, and some of the guys get into this, and they all share.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, I started realizing that, like, I go to different places that do something that I've never done before, and within a few minutes of being there, the instructors are already kind of ushering me away from the beginners and showing me other
Yeah.
stuff because they're like, oh, you're picking it up right away. I've been
Okay.
really lucky that I'm a kinesthetic learner, so when I see something, I can apply it real quick. But I've always wondered, like, is it really, like, I don't know, for me, it's not about the technique, it's about the principles. And like, once you have the basic principles, they can essentially be applied to anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basic like mechanics, and it goes beyond just body mechanics, like in engineering and everything else, like
Sure.
being able to take something apart and put it back together again, kind of deal.
Definitely. On a mental level for sure. And on the purely body mechanics thing, it's easier. It's easier because you are used to, I mean, think about it, like when you teach a beginner, half of the time when you're like, if you are facing them and you show something and you do something with their right, they are like, because they can't put together that their right is that other. It's like, so it's like let stuff that, if you have trained, you never even think about anymore. Or, you watch it on a video, you immediately pick up, right hand is doing this, left leg is doing that. But for people who are not used to it, it takes a while. And so that's something that it doesn't matter what it is. You see something else, you already start with that understanding that's more advanced already, for sure, because you are used to similar things at least.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to students, you have students come in. You never know what the student's coming in with. Like I've had some students, you show them something real quick, they get it, they move on. I've had some students stop me in the middle of a next technique. Is that a 90-degree angle? And I'm thinking, oh boy, okay, let me do some math here. Yes, yes, it's a 90-degree angle.
Yeah, no, it's totally. Everybody learns different ways, for sure.
Well, we're getting towards the end of our show here, but I guess my final question to you is, what's next? What are your plans? What do you want to do? I know you have your several podcasts and of course your personal life. What's your plan? What do you, especially, I know it's a weird thing to ask in 2021. This used to be an easy question, but
no, but it makes sense. I mean, ultimately, I keep doing the podcast. The history one has become, whereas before it was more of a side project, has become kind of my main job. I still teach in university. Ideally, when the world opens up again, I will teach in person, maybe one day a week, and then I'll do online the rest of the time. So those are going to be my two primary jobs, so to speak. But also the thing I want the most is I want to carve myself time to be able to write fiction. I've written 4 books that are non-fiction, but I really want to write fiction. So I want to have the time to do. I started already. I'm having a blast. I just want to carve myself more time to do that. In the meantime, train, go. I'm pretty excited. We just have placed something I've wanted my whole life. I have a sauna now in my backyard, so I can just go in and just lay out and sweat, and that's gonna feel good. So, but primarily those are the things. I want to kind of train for fun, write, teach, do the podcast. That's sort of the goal.
Awesome. Is there any words of wisdom you have to anyone who's older, who's doing martial arts? What would you like to share with them?
I think the goal is the nature of the game in martial arts is that there's always a high likelihood to get injured. And there's a point where, you're 18 and you heal up really fast and you don't care because whatever, that's fine. But eventually you start thinking about how much is this worth it? Am I doing the thing that So I think it's really important to train with an attitude that, maybe as long as you're training semi-realistically, tone down the intensity a tiny bit, but allows you to go long-term to be able to train for the rest of your life rather than push with this I need to go harder, and then you're wrecked, and then you never train again. And it's like, that wasn't worth it. So I'm kind of a big fan of the idea of train for longevity, train for long term. Don't train because your ego kicks in and you want to go 300%, and maybe you can afford it when you're 20. Even then, it's not a great idea, but you can get away with it. But definitely not a good idea after or later.
Is there anything you want to promote before you go?
No, all good. So, people know how to use Google, so if they're interested in anything, they can find it and stuff.
All right, so no at Daniele Bolelli at Instagram, at Twitter, at.
All the stuff exists. If people care, they can find it. It interests them, so it's all good.
All right, so you heard it. Google Daniele Bolelli. Spelling. Oh dear Lord. Okay,
yeah,
I can see it here. DANIELE. BOLLELI. I will let you know that I've misspelled it 1,000 times and his name still comes up. So
yeah, there are a lot of L's in there, so it's complicated.
All right, Daniele. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and for my listeners, stay tuned for the wrap up. And that's a wrap. Thanks for checking out Social Gelo with Angelo. This show is brought to you by viewers like you, so please subscribe and share with your friends. That's how this show works, and this is how it grows. As you can see, I'm not a giant YouTuber or or big podcast person. I don't know if that's even a real word. I do this because I love it, and it would be great if you like what you heard. Thank you very much for supporting the show. Share it with your friends. Catch you all next time. Peace.